Two households both alike in dignity. Sorry. As the first light of dawn crept into Fern Gully, Krista woke up. This was the time of day the tiny fairy loved best. She swung out of her cobweb hammock, careful not to wake her two sisters, and tiptoed out of her sleeping hollow. She fluttered up the spiral staircase inside the trunk of the towering strangler fig tree where she lived, and opened a tiny fungus door. But when she stepped onto the branch outside, she discovered she wasn't the only one awake. A flock of rainbow lorikeets darted through the trees. Suddenly, the forest was alive with bird calls as the dawn chorus erupted into a short, vibrant song. Krista fluttered her turquoise wings and dived out of the tree into a delicate blanket of mist. She fell past a million sparkling dewdrops, somersaulted through the mist, then, before she hit the ground, pulled out her dive and spiraled upwards. She danced in the air to the beat of Bird's early morning song, then practiced a few loop-de-loops and barrel rolls. "Watch out, Lori!" she shouted, colliding with a rainbow lorikeet. The lorikeet squawked and darted after her.
"You don't own this forest, Krista!"
"Oh, bug off, Lori!" she laughed, catching hold of the trailing pepper vine and swinging on it through the trees.
"I can outfly you any day,"
Lori squawked. She grinned. "That's a laugh. You fly about as fast as a wet brush turkey."
"Then let's see who gets to the palm grove first,"
he chirped, darting through the trees ahead of her. Krista accepted the challenge and flew after him. Speed flying was her favorite sport, and she knew she was one of the fastest flyers in the forest. Only her elf friend Pips came close to beating her. She easily caught up to the lorikeet, matching him turn for turn as they dived over the tops of the tree ferns and walking stick palms and zigzagged through the trunks of huge red cedar and brush box trees. They crossed the creek at Python Rock and darted through Sleepy Hollow. Krista waved to Stoneface as she streaked past. "I'll bring you back something special," she shouted to her favorite rock, wondering if he ever really heard her. She chased the lorikeet around tangled vines and prickly ash. They twisted and turned through fallen tree gap. They soared way up to the treetops, turning just below the canopy, then hurtling back to earth and skimming across the forest floor. A noisy pitta bird screeched and ducked for cover as they buzzed dangerously low overhead. Both of them knew that flying at this speed was forbidden by fairy lore, but neither of them slowed down. The lorikeet knew he was finally beaten when Krista shot past him in a dazzling burst of iridescent blue light.
"That's a fairy trick,"
he complained, flapping into the branches of a tall flame tree where he disappeared among the red flowers. She laughed. "Come on, Lori, I am a fairy." But the lorikeet refused to continue the race on the grounds that being a fairy she had an unfair advantage. Krista didn't bother to argue with him and continued flying. By now the forest was bathed in dappled morning light, and she was ready to join in buzzing morning activity. Dancing playfully across shafts of sunlight, she helped a bee collect honey, then stopped to watch a flock of rowdy parrots squabble over ripe fruit. A wampu pigeon cooed,
"Good morning,"
and she joined in a song with the frogs. Everywhere she looked, the forest was busy. A fussy brush turkey scratched in the soil to build a high dirt mound for his nest. Worried green ants searched for food, and wanderer butterflies flitted gracefully between flowering blueberry ash and native wisteria. She followed a narrow path through the trees, humming an old fairy song and stopping every now and again to collect spider webbing and tiny seeds. These she tucked carefully into her cobweb pouch, the magic pouch old Magiloon had given her many summers ago. Krista smiled as she thought about Magiloon. Magiloon was the oldest fairy in the forest, so old that Krista's grandfather used to say she'd been there since the very first tree. Krista felt excited when she remembered the old fairy's promise to her. "Someday I will teach you the old powers, for knowledge must never be lost. But first you must grow up." "When will I ever grow up?" Krista wondered, jumping onto a shaft of sunlight streaming through the canopy of the forest. Sliding down it on the forest floor, she landed with a bump on a wet leaf and skidded across it, crashing into a heap of leaves rotting beneath an umbrella tree.
"But who's there? Who's there?"
snuffled a familiar voice from a nearby burrow. "It's me, Krista, only I'm covered in mulch." A long-nosed potoroo slowly hopped out of his burrow, looking more like a mouse than anything else, except his nose was much longer. The potoroo was very old. He was almost blind, and in some places his fur didn't quite cover the bald spots. Krista smiled at him while she dusted herself off. "Hello, Potsy. I haven't seen you for ages. Where have you been?" The potoroo sat up on his hind legs, clasping his tiny front paws. His whiskers bristled nervously as he sniffed the air.
"Oh, Hello, Krista. I haven't seen anyone.
he said. No, I said, where have you been?
No need to shout.
He sniffed.
I've been down at Thunder Falls, but it's too damp for me down there. You stay away from those falls. The frogs are getting all worked up.
What about? She asked, gently stroking his long whiskers.
They're talking about the old tales.
He replied mysteriously. What old tales? Do you mean human tales? Krista fluttered into the air with excitement.
No.
He sniffed, glancing over his shoulder to see if anyone was listening.
And you come back down to earth. Don't go filling that pretty head of yours with human tales.
He twitched his whiskers nervously.
No, the talk was about the weather and why it's not the same as it used to be. Everyone at the falls thinks someone is playing around with it.
Krista was amazed. But that's weather working. That's straight out of fairy legend.
Well, the weather is all topsy-turvy.
He snuffled.
You don't have to be a frog to notice that.
And then he whispered.
Everyone thinks the weather is being worked by Hexus.
Hexus? Spluttered Krista, goggle-eyed. Wasn't Hexus an evil spirit who tried to destroy this forest a long time ago? The Potoroo nodded.
That's the one, but what worries me is why anyone is remembering Hexus at all. Those old tales are best forgotten. They just stir everyone up, and that always means trouble. But nevertheless, there is an unnatural force in this forest at the moment. I can feel it in my bones.
Don't worry, Potsy, said Krista, feeling sorry for the nervous old Potoroo. There's nothing in this forest to hurt us, you know that. I'm sure there's a good reason why the weather's been a bit scatty. I'm not scared of frog talk.
Just be careful all the same,
he said, nodding his worried little head. And you take care of yourself, replied Krista. I wish you'd come back to Old High Rise where I could look after you.
I can look after myself,
he snuffled.
But it's kind of you to offer.
As she floated away from the old Potoroo, she'd thought about what he'd said. Weather working, she muttered, startling a bright orange butterfly. What if someone really is working the weather? Do you think it's possible? The butterfly didn't reply. Don't you worry, I'll ask Magiloon, she'll know, Krista said to the butterfly. But the butterfly still didn't reply. It wasn't worried about a thing. On this sun-drenched, peaceful morning, it didn't have a care in the world.